Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. Slide decks from the presenters are going to be available below. Thanks for watching.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. Um, our panel conversation today is on how architects can support housing advocacy and bridge policy gaps. Just a quick kind of raise of hands. Who here is in architecture or the design side? And then how many people do we have on sort of the development end? And then we have other people here that are from advocacy, I'm assuming. Brian, thank you. So we'll go ahead and get started here. Today I'm Dave Mojica with Scott Edwards Architecture. I've been working with the AIA, and we founded a housing advocacy committee at the end of last year in recognition of the fact that although architects play a major role in seeing these developments realized, we are not actually active players when it comes to the policy end. And I think we've recognized that there is effectively sort of a gap in the feedback loop. So we started this committee a year ago, and we have been in active conversation with various coalitions. And one of those is neighborhood partnerships. So Ethan is here today moderating with me. So I'll let him introduce himself and get us started.
Great. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ethan Livermore. I'm the economic justice organizer at Neighborhood Partnerships. One of my many hats that I wear there is that I organize the Oregon Economic Justice Roundtable and help out with individual development accounts and support some of the Oregon Housing Alliance work. We are the active participants in the policy process. We organize people, we meet with legislators to develop specific policies that we then lobby and support lobbying efforts during the legislative session down in Salem and kind of around the state as well. Before we start demystifying the legislative process, which is really confusing sometimes, we just wanted to get a quick poll. Quick little hand poll. By show of hands, how many of you have actually been to the Oregon State Capitol? This is the Oregon State Capitol, if you haven't seen it before, by the way. It's not just some random beautiful building. Okay, so some of us have been down to the Capitol. Now, these two aren't necessarily exclusive to each other. Who has met with their state representative or state senator? Okay, great. So we're coming in with a little bit of experience. That's good. And if you haven't done either of those things, there's still plenty of time, still plenty of opportunities too. So welcome to the journey. So to start off with demystifying what the heck the Oregon State Legislature is, this back in 1989 is just sort of a little mission statement that the legislature has created to enact new laws and revise existing ones relating to health, education, and general welfare of Oregonians, and to make decisions that keep the state in good economic and environmental condition. That's sort of the baseline of what our legislators and government aim to do every time that they meet in session. A few bullet pointed facts. Unlike some legislatures in some other states and some other areas of the world, the Oregon State Legislature is what's called a bicameral form of government. That's a super fancy word to say that we have a House and we have a Senate. The Oregon State Legislature is also really interesting and different from the federal government, where that the people who are representing us, the people that we vote for to represent us down in Salem, are considered citizens still, meaning that they have day jobs. There are some legislators that own small businesses within their district. There's even a legislator out on the coast that still holds the world record for largest kite flown, because him and his family have owned a kite flying business in Lincoln City. So it's really common to look at the legislature and say, oh my gosh, these people are so intimidating. But these people are our neighbors. These people are our friends and family. They're just citizens participating in the government process. The primary purpose of the legislature is, of course, introducing, debating, considering, and voting on bills. We generally call this legislating. Sometimes it's a beautiful process. Sometimes it's not a beautiful process. Every year, most every year, the legislature meets in either a long or a short session. Long sessions happen every 2 years. Those long sessions look like these legislators and us advocates duking it out, changing the world for 6 months starting in the winter. And the constitutional last date of the long legislative session is towards the end of July. Generally, sometimes it's a little shorter if we get stuff done. Sometimes it's a little bit longer if, for example, some legislators decide not to come to work. And short sessions typically happen in the winter, and that's like 6 months of action kind of crammed into generally a month. The original intent of short sessions were just for tiny little budget fixes or changes to different rules or statutes or things passed in previous sessions. But these days, the general trend is that people are wanting to come with money asks, budget asks, and actually trying to push some policies in recent years. So short sessions have become kind of a bigger tool in between long sessions. In addition to this, the governor can call a special session. There have been a couple of different special sessions that have happened since I've been in the legislative sphere. And sometimes they happen during the summer in between long sessions. Sometimes they happen just before short sessions. They can happen whenever sort of the governor says so. And those can be for any particular reason. Typically they're emergencies or, really pressing issues that the governor sees as a priority. How a bill becomes a law. If you're like me, I grew up watching what was that cartoon? I'm just a bill. Oh, I'm only a bill. Yeah, Schoolhouse Rock. Yes, exactly. The process that adorable little bill, they actually did a pretty good job of kind of explaining it. It's a relatively simple process in terms of steps, but the way to get to each of those steps is really where things get a little confusing. So first, and I'll give an adorable little example for each of these steps here. Every bill has to start with an idea. It can be a nonprofit organization back in a district. It can be an advocacy group, a think tank, a legislator themselves. There's one session where a Girl Scout troop said, man, we think it's really sad that dogs just get trapped in hot cars. Let's go talk to our state representative to see if we can pass a law doing something about that. So these Girl Scouts had an idea. And then they came to their state representative and said, hey, we want to do something about this. Can you introduce a bill? And the state representative was like, well, yeah, it's a long session. Like, of course, like, let's do it. So either during the legislative session or pre-session, these ideas that turn into legislative concepts through magical lawyer talk get filed, and the idea gets put into legislative text. Then we advocates get to take a physical sheet of paper and literally walk around to offices to find roles called co-sponsors or sponsors, but basically people who are willing to put their name on a piece of paper saying that they support this piece of legislation. So naturally, the Girl Scouts dog in car bill got a lot of support because it's a great idea and it's super cute. And then it can either then get introduced on the House side of the legislature, or it will get introduced on the Senate side of the legislature. And oftentimes that depends on who the main champion of the bill is, but also a little bit of strategy, which is kind of getting into the weeds. And if you want to talk to me more about legislative strategy more in depth, then I'll buy me a cup of coffee or something. So then once we have a bill and we have a bill number and we've decided where the bill is going to start and who's supporting it, at the beginning of the session, the bills are introduced and they get sorted into different legislative committees, either on the House side or the Senate side, according to what those bills are trying to address, the different categories: housing, human services, environmental, judiciary issues. So all the bills get sorted into policy committees, which is really the first level of where things work. In these committees, there are things called public hearings and work sessions. Public hearings are where folks like you all, folks like me, folks like my mom can come down to Salem or send an email and physically get to say, I support this bill, I oppose this bill, and here's why. This is where the first sort of level of advocacy gets to happen. This is a really important part, especially early in the session, because this is where Oregonians really get to have a say in what the bill actually does. If there's something that is missing from the bill, then somebody can come in and say that it's missing. If something's wrong with the bill, somebody can come in and say, hey, this is what's wrong with the bill and this is how it should change. And you get to say that directly to the chairs of the committee, the other legislators, their staff, either virtually or in Salem. So this is where the public really gets to be heard. So after a series of public hearings, this bill, all the way over here, then eventually gets voted on in the committee. The committee holds what's called a work session, where they either get to propose or adopt different amendments, changing the actual language of the bill, making it better, sometimes making it worse, watering it down, making it stronger. All of that happens in work sessions in the policy committees. So then they'll vote on whether they recommend passing the bill through to the next committee. And then after it gets out of the policy committee, which again is kind of that first tier, from the idea to the policy committees, then it gets moved up to sort of the big kid committees. The big kid committees are Ways and Means, Revenue. So the bill will go to Ways and Means if it costs money in any way. I used to be confused as to why it was called Ways and Means, but then it sort of clicked for me one day. It's the way that we fund it and the means by which we fund it. That's what the committee sort of decides on. The Revenue Committee then will talk about anything and discuss anything that impacts like our ability to generate revenue for our programs, or if it's a piece of legislation that impacts how we handle taxes. Anything to do with taxes, it goes to revenue. So if the bill has any sort of pleasure and honor to make it past these two massive committees, each of these committees have so many different subcommittees that it can get a little frustrating sometimes, but if it gets past these two big kid committees, then it gets to the House floor or the Senate floor. And that's where typically it'll have to wait for a couple of days just to, make its way up into the order. And then when it comes time for it to be voted on, then that's the big magical, exciting, say aye, say nay, abstain. And then if it passes one chamber, then it bounces over to the opposite chamber and can sometimes repeat the same process of going through the policy committee up to the Ways and Means or Revenue, and then back onto the other side. So if passed in the House, then it kind of completes the process again over in the Senate. And then if the Senate votes on it and says, yes, you've got a bill and it's on its way to the governor and it's going to get signed. And then you get to take a big picture and then you get to frame the bill and maybe keep the pen and you go home happy and you change the world. So that's kind of the legislative process in a nutshell. I hope that was informative.
So ultimately, these bills are passed, and when it's in relationship to affordable housing, it's because there is a vision that homes are built. I think what we have found in our conversations is that for those that are very invested in the advocacy and lawmaking portion, there's not a lot of dialogue past that. It kind of suddenly shifts to the developer, design, and construction industry. And as architects, we play a critical role in coordinating with all of these various policies. So during the funding stages, architects typically are working closely with developers to understand what is feasible for a site. So we are at that same time looking at these new bills and policies that have been enacted and understanding how that impacts development with the development teams. Through design, we're engaging with the neighborhoods, we're engaging with the end users and focus groups and community engagement sessions. And we're working closely with the contractors to make sure that what's being proposed is viable. So through this process, architects are heavily involved. So for today's panel conversation, our 5 panelists have generously come to have a cross-discipline conversation regarding policy and how architects can potentially become more involved, and hopefully as a group of mixed, as our audience is a group of mixed individuals on the development side, policymaking side, and design industry, hopefully you'll find ways to better utilize your design teams when it comes to advocacy and understand that they are there to support you on the front end as well when we are trying to push change. So first we have Bill Lanning. He is with MWA. He is a principal there and has contributed to a lot of the affordable housing projects that I think myself in the industry have looked up to over the past really 15 years of so yeah, 20 now, yeah. So Jennifer Nye is the managing director at Salazar Architects. She has also been heavily invested in the realm of affordable housing through there, and she also serves as a commissioner on Beaverton's Planning Commission, along with some other volunteer efforts related to jurisdictions related to Beaverton. Wendy Klein is the Senior Development Manager at Community Development Partners. Previous to that, she also worked at Reach CDC and Central City Concern. She is unique in the development field because she is a great advocate for architects because she herself is also a licensed architect. We have Eunice Kim from the city of Salem. She is a long-range planning manager. She has been there since 2013, so almost a little over a decade now. And she is also a member of Salem's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And to round us out, we have Alex Colas with Colas Construction. He is the CEO of one of the largest Black-owned construction firms in the Pacific Northwest, and they have contributed to many affordable housing projects for, I believe, many of the architects that are on the panel and sitting in this room over the past, 10, 15 years. So we'll get us started here. I think the first panelist question that we are starting with today are, what are the current ways that the architectural community is engaging with legislation? So I don't know who wants to get us started there.
All right, is this working? Yeah. So you're obviously getting a kind of a broad but narrow perspective. So I'm kind of taking this on as through my experience. And I think historically, we've been more engaged in the kind of that process at the local level when it comes to working with jurisdictions specifically to analyze the zoning code, the planning code, understand what the programming requirements or needs are for the project, what the development is trying to accomplish, and then seeing, if there is ambiguity in the code. I don't want to say looking for that, but looking for opportunities sometimes in conversations with the local planners to be able to talk about, verify if we're reading it correctly, or if there's some adjustment or way to interpret it that might provide a better outcome to both what the city's hoping for and what the development side is hoping for. There's been opportunities, and I think we've seen the greatest opportunity at times when cities are actually looking at amending their zoning codes, and we have a project that aligns with that timing. I'll use an example. We've got a project in Corvallis right now that the city was actively changing zoning designations, and in this particular area, they were looking at modifying the zoning and the designation for a project that was it's a shelter project, or it's permanent supportive housing. And the way that was written, it was a lot of advantages to that type of development, but it was also written in a way that limited the ground floor to only non-residential use, as well as needing a mixed use component. They had a provision in their code that had given an allowance for historic structures to not have to meet those requirements. And so with the design side, with our planner and the development team, we worked with the city to talk with them and work in a provision for affordable housing specifically also, to marry up with the historic, to kind of remove that requirement in a way that allowed the zoning, the city to do it legally. No matter how many times we think, oh, we really should change this. We realize also there's a process that has to be gone through. We do appreciate being able to work with the planning department and the local jurisdiction when we can on items like that.
I think to what Bill's saying, oftentimes the majority of the planners that maybe you work with on a specific project are current planners. They're the ones who are processing the application, making sure the project meets all of the code. But most communities have long-range planners. So I'm in long-range planning, and we're the ones that kind of look at zoning designations or code. And we're always looking to improve kind of how a code works. So in Salem, for example, we did a big kind of revision of our multifamily design standards back in 2019, 2020. And we held a bunch of focus groups essentially with the development community, including architects, to understand, does this make sense? Our requirements for balconies? What about articulation? How does that contribute or not? And so I think one of the ways that we've been really trying to be more technical and get the input from architects specifically is through focus groups. We also work on policy. So planners often work on housing policy through the planning kind of community development lens. And so right now, communities across Oregon are working on housing production strategies. This is kind of a state mandated. We need to actually lay out the actions the city will take to promote housing development. Most of the time, planners are going to be kind of managing that project. So in Salem, we're working on one of those right now. We actually have focus groups starting next week with architects and Dave and others to, again, do a deep dive. What are the obstacles to development? What are the things you're seeing that maybe we don't understand, from the local jurisdiction, that we can make those changes like Bill was saying? And we're always open to those changes.
So I serve both on the Beaverton Planning Commission and an Urban Renewal Advisory Committee. And so those two different bodies provide different opportunities as an architect for me to, shape or give input on policy within the city of Beaverton. Within Planning Commission, like Eunice was saying, we review long-range plans and code updates. So like Beaverton did a big urban renewal, or not urban renewal, but urban growth boundary expansion, where we were really looking at land use opportunities and how to zone the land. And really, South Cooper Mountain came in 2 phases. And the first phase, there were a lot of lessons learned on how affordable housing was getting integrated in that development. So as the next round came into the urban growth boundary, there was a lot of intentional conversations about how to get affordable housing distributed more equitably throughout the development. And and then there's things like making allowances for affordable housing, like giving more flexibility in the zoning code. So there was a lot of discussions over the 15 years I was been on the Planning Commission. And so, as an architect, I can give input on how those impact development from my perspective. But then through the Urban Renewal Committee, it's really more generally about the economic sides of development. And in that committee, we're hearing from all different parts of the city, whether it's economic development, the mayor's office, and we get to give input on the projects they're doing and kind of give them thoughts. Have you thought about this? Maybe you should talk to this. And they collect that information and it shapes projects. They also hire lobbyists, and so they can take actions direct to the legislature that really have value to the city of Beaverton. So those are ways, as an architect, I'm volunteering and providing input and shaping policy.
Yeah, as a developer on this panel, typically the developer has already selected the site once they engage the architect. And I think, there can be some discrepancies when a developer comes to the architect and says, what can fit on the site? So what we're trying to do is maximize the site with units. And we're basically pigeonholing the architect to say, put as many units as possible on the site. We need it to work. We need it to pencil in the pro forma. So the question that I have for the architects on this panel and in the audience is, what are the questions that you want to ask the developer? So, I think the architect and having worked in the field, you know, it is a client-based field. It's a client-based profession. So oftentimes, you know, the developer says, I need to get 200 units on this site. Otherwise, you know, we won't have a project. So I think the question is really to get back to the really beginnings of the built environment and what it means for people, and start to ask the developer hard questions about the site. Don't worry, you know, the developer wants their architect to be, you know, to be assertive, to say, what really are your goals for this project? Do you want to cram as many units as possible? Does that make sense? And how, and then really talk to the developer about the legislation, about the zoning letter that OHCS requires. You know, you in order to get your funding, you have to submit a zoning letter that speaks to which variances are going to be required and how the entitlement process is going to go. And so I think the developer really needs to understand, okay, you're going to need this variance, you're going to need this entitlement, you're going to need this, you're going to need that, and sort of all the risks involved in that development process. And so, you know, I always hope that my architect or our architect is going to be assertive, is going to be aggressive, is going to really show us, you know, really what is the best, what is the best use of the site? What do you want? And show us the differences and see how we can make it work. Oregon Housing and Community Services is a fantastic organization. And I think, you know, instead of cramming as many units as possible on a site, you know, maybe there is an opportunity for the architects to become more involved and really say, what is the livability that we want for our community? Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of points that have been made here. And I think it really comes to specifically as it pertains to affordable housing and flexibility, right? I think what Ethan said is perfect. It starts with an idea, and the unique nature of affordable housing is you have like title guarantees, right? Like you have to maintain that affordability on title for a certain period of time. So I really do think there should be unique, flexible attributes for the design zoning standards of affordable housing, because the other unique part about affordable housing is you can't, unlike market rate, you can't pass your cost on necessarily to your tenants. So as we all know, the cost of insurance right now, it's just going through the roof, and it's making it really difficult for a lot of these projects. So if we were to all have a big idea, Bill talked about, you know, the mixed use retail component on a project. You could think about parking requirements. You could think about, you know, elevator cores. Do we need to have 2 elevator cores in a building that is this, you know, this many units? Could there be unique things about affordable housing to make it more affordable to build? Because we already know we have to build these projects to, you know, last a long time. So you're putting products in that are of higher quality and caliber. And then the other thing you have to think about is typically you're utilizing, you know, either Davis-Bacon or Boley wages. And so when you think about from a construction standpoint, the requirement that Bill was talking about of mixed use retail component, well, when we're building and we have that mandate, then you have one part of the project that has to have a Boley rate and the other part of the project that has to have a Davis-Bacon rate. Sometimes, you know, just the management of that for everybody adds a significant cost. So I think it's fair for us to have big ideas specifically around affordable housing and leverage our legislature to really push those forwards. And I just want to point out to all of us, like, you know, everybody's excited about CLT. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's doing it. You know, that went through our legislature because originally there weren't city zoning codes or standards that allowed these projects to be built. That was just less than, you know, 15 years ago. And now we're seeing 12-story buildings and 14-story buildings. So as Ethan really said, it starts with an idea, and that's the proof of concept that those ideas can come to reality. And I think we all need to like get really aggressive with our ideas as it pertains to affordable housing because the need is so dire. And I don't think the standards should be the same. And that doesn't mean that I'm saying it's going to be of lesser quality. Because we all know the people that build affordable housing in this region, we build top quality housing. I think in some regions, the reasons that they don't want to have a double standard is because the fear is that if you create a standard for affordable housing that's different than market rate, then the bad actors will use that in a way not to provide quality. I don't see that happening in this region. Obviously, we always have to have the safes and double checks for us, but I think it's more about making it so that we can create more, provide more at a better costs.
Thank you. So I think where Bill had started off the conversation on this question, it's probably for the architects that are in this audience, it's probably what we're most used to and that we most see in day-to-day practice, that we are working with the local jurisdictions. I think what Eunice and Jennifer have pointed out are other opportunities to work with your local jurisdictions and understand how that policy is getting converted at a state level, how it's getting converted to a local level. And I'm just curious for the architects that are in this room, just a show of hands, has anybody been involved at a local level in focus groups or other sort of efforts like that? So you see 3. So I think that's where there are opportunities. So I think at the end we'll talk about how people can get more engaged on the advocacy side and that kind of translation. Jennifer is volunteering with Planning Commission, and her efforts are exceptional in the architectural industry. But that is another way that if people are motivated and want to dedicate more time, you can serve their volunteer positions to be on Planning Commission. Those are opportunities for architects if they want to position themselves to share a different perspective, because I think a lot of the policies that we are often talking about is about housing production and the quantity of homes, but architects are really the gatekeepers of the placemaking and the quality of the homes that are being made. That's something that I think is very hard to regulate from a policy side. So we kind of have to do it as industry professionals in partnership with our contractors. So I think with that, our next question here is, the AIA Housing Advocacy Committee has proposed partnering with local coalitions in each of our 5 section chapters that have aligned missions as a way of contributing a voice to the day-to-day advocacy work. So what Ethan was talking about, they're constantly tracking bills, working with organizations to propose new bills, lobbying. This is something as architects, we're not lobbyists, and I think we can all admit that. We have a very baseline level of knowledge, I think, on how a bill becomes a law. But partnering with local coalitions across the state is a potential way for us to share and start becoming more involved for an industry that historically has not been on the front end. So I think we're curious from our panelists today, what are some of the unique perspectives that you all believe that really only an architect can bring to the policymaking conversation? So I think, Andrew, do you want to get us started here?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is like a vision. Like, you all can help legislators see what it could look like. So I think it starts there. And, as we've even been having our prep meetings for this, the kind of ideas that, the single elevator stair core, that wasn't my idea, as much as I like to, say everything's that was from the architects on this panel. And I was super impressed because, contractors and architects, it's always like, contractors are like, you guys are always adding money, and architects are like, we're just trying to make this beautiful. And I think that it really is a joint effort. So being able to show what that could look like, show how it's not going to necessarily make a project less than, but how it can actually not only allow you to spend money in areas to create more quality, but at the same time deliver more units. I think that's a really important element that you all can do. And then as far as partnering with coalitions, there's so many different coalitions out there that I think with architects as a part of the team can really go much further, right? Like being able to show those visuals, the diagrams, how it's going to create, the end goal. I think it really and will generate real interest. And I know at the legislature, I mean, all we hear is the talk of needing more housing, right? So I think with us partnering hand in hand together, a lot can be done.
Andrew, before you pass the mic over, could you speak a little bit about your involvement with the Housing and Development Committee?
Yeah, so actually last night, Senator Dick Anderson, he received an award. And I think the thing I'll say about our Senate and House, and Ethan will attest to this, when it comes to housing, it really is bipartisan. When I was there, I had obviously done research on everybody that I was speaking to. It's an incredible group. And it was supposed to be 20 minutes. And I was there for an hour. And there was just constant flow of questions. Senator Anderson was asking about land banking because he's really concerned about the need for land in more of the rural areas and what our thoughts were on that. And I went to that with developer, architect, and myself. And just from that quick interaction, I saw him last night. He's like, we still have more to do on, the conversation that we had. And what I realized was I couldn't tell who was a Republican and who was a Democrat on that committee because everybody's focus was about the need for housing. And I think the thing that you saw, a lot of the Republican senators that were representing housing, they're serving rural areas. And we all know there's a huge need for housing in rural areas and rural communities and economic development that really is a response that comes out of the housing. And I think you see how there's that connection between the rural and the urban and just that need. So I would say that all of your voices, if you're able to, get together a group and go talk to that committee, it will create the impetus to getting to the point of creating the bill that then can really, because they'll push it forward for you. Like you need those people because there's people on that committee that are also on Ways and Means Committee, right? So if they're on both committees, as he said, you got to get to Ways and Means, otherwise there's no money. But they're key players on that committee that are also on Ways and Means. So I think starting those conversations will lead to the bill that will lead to the change.
Thank you. I think, Wendy, in our kind of early conversations, we had been chatting as a group about that there are also cost-saving measures that sometimes go through legislation. And this is, I think one of the most recent ones that we were talking about is the review from OSSC on single-stair construction. I think that is it's an interesting realm because I think the single-stair construction as it relates to affordable housing, this is an area where architects that are invested in affordable housing, it's, as Andrew was pointing out, it's a cost savings measure. We are not moving forward with it in Oregon. Not gonna think people can have their own opinions, but Wendy, do you want to kind of share a little bit about that?
Having being a licensed architect and having colleagues in the architecture profession, often get asked the question, what can we do as architects to promote more housing, more affordable housing, more housing in general? And I often think, well, what do you as architects know best? Obviously, the zoning codes, the building codes, good design. And so focusing, I think, on those elements is key for architects in terms of, promoting more housing. And so I know, there's been a big push for upzoning. And, in Portland, there's all type, turning single family lots into 4 houses and, all of that. And so I think we've really sort of embraced the upzoning idea, and we continue to promote it. But now sort of looking into the building code itself, what elements of the building code could be modified to make better and more housing? And, one of the items that I had been reading about for the last several months, even a year, was this idea of a single stair, a single exit stair rather than, 2 means of egress. And, when we think of housing across the country, we think of, or multifamily housing across the country, we do think of sort of homogenized rectangles with these, you know, stairs on either end and a long, endless corridor with doors. And what that ends up doing is, as a developer, what we have to do is we have to, you know, purchase many parcels of land to kind of group that together to make a feasible project because of these two means of egress, you know, the double loaded corridor. And then all the buildings end up looking quite similar, let's be honest, you know, they have a form. And so then the question to me is, as architects, how can we kind of promote new ideas in the building code to make more unique housing, to be able to take advantage of smaller lot sizes? So instead of there being, you know, 8 units on a small 5,000 square foot lot, we could get 20 units, you know, all of these ideas that I think architects are really the key people to promote this. And, you know, if you sort of look and Google the single stair, and I'm sure all the architects here, you know, you see these beautiful single stairs, and it creates community, and the doors are off the stair, and then you get light and air from both sides. You know, you're not in a unit that you just get light from, you know, the north side or the east side, and you get cross ventilation. There's many ways that this promotes healthy and beautiful living. And so I think for architects, really looking at the codes and the zoning codes and the building codes, and really trying to focus as a group on things that will make more housing and better housing for people. Rather than saying, you know, we need more housing and being part of this. There's plenty of people advocating for the dollars for housing, but there's nobody really at least that I know of, there's nobody really advocating for really taking a deep dive into our codes and how that can make housing better for people.
And I would just add, I think any ideas that you have, feel free to bring to your local planner. I don't think there's any planners in the room, so I can just say that call your local planner. We are always open to ideas. I get emails and phone calls all the time with like new ideas. Just recently, I got a call from someone who was like, hey, I really want to be able to do an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, with a townhouse. In Salem, we don't allow that. It's not something that we had contemplated when we allowed ADUs in 2017. And I was like, that's a great idea. I'll put that on our list. We're always keeping lists of things and ideas from the community. And so we just put it through a code amendment. It just passed this week. And so now we allow ADUs with townhouses, right? That idea came from the community as something that we didn't think about. So it gets to the idea of multi-generational housing, right? Better using small lots, et cetera. So call your local planner. We're always open.
Yeah, and I think as architects, we bring a different perspective, and we get a lot of lessons learned. Or if you go back and digest your past project and be like, if only we had been able to do this, we could have had so much more. And I think sharing back what the barriers were on the project to making it even better really is helpful to the planners, to the developers, because I think by the end of the project, the developers have been through so much, especially on the finance side, that, you know, you kind of forget some of the decisions that were made so early in the project that could have made a big difference. I think that's where we can really contribute to this.
And I think one of the things that we have to recognize, and Wendy brought it up, is, you know, we talked earlier about the local zoning, and the zoning code is something that I think is easy to, not easy to adjust. I don't mean to say the process is simple, but is malleable. Whereas like this with the single stair example, you know, that is a code at the state level that's getting adopted and looking to be applied throughout every jurisdiction. And so I think that's why, you know, it was approved to the legislature, but then the Structural Specialties Board nixed the idea. And that I think is in part because there are communities that are better in a position to support that type of change, because they've got emergency response, you know, more emergency response opportunities and higher, you know, quicker times than some of the other communities. But that's also a difference between what we see in the zoning code right now and the structural code. The zoning code does have allowances for particular instances like affordable housing, whereas the you know, the structural code has not taken that into account. You know, there are some special provisions in the city of Portland that are different than the state code, And that might be a place to start in terms of, working with, I'd say a larger metropolitan area to try to make some of these adjustments. One of the other things I'd like to add is Jennifer said, especially, the architects in the room, we've probably faced the same challenges on every project, like collectively, but we also design in a silo to where, we're all great people. And I think there's a number of great, architecture firms. We're also trying to run a business. So we don't communicate as much as we should amongst ourselves. And that's where I think Dave and Molly, working on creating the AIA committee to help, address this and bring us together is a really good step. Because, just like I said before, I don't know what other architects are doing actively. And maybe there are some conversations that are happening with jurisdictions or at the state. And I'm frustrated thinking, why don't they change this? And maybe they're trying to, I don't know. But I think as we can come together as a group, we're just more aware of what's going on and can support each other better.
Thank you. And I think one of the sort of key takeaways from this conversation this morning is I think a lot of times architects and developers, and I think for all of us, there's a little bit of we sometimes think that there's a wall to access for people that are involved in policymaking. And I think Andrew makes a good point. Events like this, or the last Housing Oregon event, where I think some of the mayoral candidates were in attendance that Housing Oregon facilitated, these are approachable individuals who care about housing. Just because they are involved in policymaking doesn't mean you can't just walk up at an event like this and introduce yourself. I think that that is one of the great opportunities that exists in this sort of realm. And like Eunice said, I think, you can call and there are other people in the industry that can help you find the right person. I think all it requires is a little bit of dedication and effort. So yes, we'll go ahead and Ethan can take us to our next question.
Yeah, so with all this stuff being said, and I think Eunice, you kind of touched on it a little bit here too, but the next question that we want you guys to kind of talk about is what opportunities exist for increased engagement at a local level?
So we talked a little bit about focus groups and just calling your planner. And serving on planning commissions, we actually have an architect on our planning commission in Salem, and she's reached out specifically and said, can we meet to talk about how we can make the code more walkable, have more climate friendly areas? So we've started those discussions. But if you're interested in serving, maybe not for 15 years, but you want to, but you want to contribute. Oftentimes when we do planning projects, whether it's a corridor plan, an area plan, a housing production strategy, we have advisory committees, and we are always looking for volunteers to kind of represent all those that are impacted, all different perspectives. So you can always say like, hey, is there a seat for an architect? And usually the answer is yes, because we just want people to participate to kind of bring that new perspective. And so I would say that's one way. I think one of the ways we as local jurisdictions reach out is when we're working on, whether it's code or neighborhood plans or area projects, is that we're always reaching out to the development community and like, who is the development community, right? So in Salem, we call like the home builders, we call the realtors, and there's always a point person. That person then kind of spreads the word, right? And then so we start kind of getting everyone involved. Sometimes we have workshops specifically with the development community, but we don't really necessarily know who that single point of contact would be in the architecture community. And so if there is that person, I think that would be helpful, right? So then they can spread the word. So that would be, I think, something we could work on.
So as Eunice said, there's lots of opportunities, whether it's corridor plans. So as I transition off the planning commission, I actually signed up, volunteered, and they selected me to be on the transportation advisory committee for updating our TSP. But what I would say is a lot of these committees actually aren't a very big lift on time commitments. Planning commission obviously is the biggest time commitment because we reserve every Wednesday evening and there's some prep, but honestly, we haven't had a meeting for 3 months now. So it's really cyclical. But like the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee, it's once a month and there's no homework. So some of these committees are really a light lift, but there's a lot of meaning there. And so I would encourage everybody to just find a committee that's really interesting and the commitments are, you know, maybe a few months or a year. And they're really respectful. If you can't be there, you know, it's okay. So I just encourage to find something that's of interest.
And I think Jennifer mentioned this in terms of the local level, but I think, you know, revisiting the project with your local planner, the person that helped you through the process, as well as the building official, once the project is complete, I think would make a huge difference. So even putting together a presentation of what worked, what didn't work. I mean, for example, I'm working on a project where there's a prescriptive code that requires that the roofs all have dormers. Sorry. And, you know, the design is supposed to be modern and elegant, you know, with a low slung hip roof. And the planner came and said, you know, you didn't meet the code, you need to add dormers. Well, I mean, does that make any sense? Like, you're just going to add dormers? I mean, just because that's what's in the prescriptive code. So I think when we go back and revisit the project with them, you know, we will make sure to say, you know, your prescriptive code, you know, doesn't take into account good design. And so, you know, we want to make sure that we're circling back with, you know, the planners, with the building officials specifically. And we're creating that feedback loop, as they say.
I would also say, I mean, the life of an architect is kind of like the life of a project. Jennifer might agree or disagree, in that you start out really excited and happy, and then the work starts. And then when you have TCO, then you're happy again. But there's a lot that goes into the process over the course of that time. And I think architects are, you know, obviously the developer also, but are the group who see every piece of the project throughout the entirety. So starting with that initial, you know, inception, to meeting with the planners, to, you know, getting to work with great contractors like Andrew and his team. But continue to challenge us, you know, as developers, or, you know, planners, or people in the community that aren't architects. You know, I think we can lose sight of what, I don't want to say of what we can do more of, but a lot of times we'll get asked, you know, for minimal engagement on some of the legislative stuff. We'll be asked to, hey, you know, review, you know, this is going in front of the committee, review this, and if you know, can provide support for it through a letter, that sort of thing, which is good and beneficial, but kind of continue to challenge us to be more active and more engaged, to you know, all the different levels that we can. And I think the support is there through the design community for that.
I think it's at a local level, it's, you know, what everybody said, it's when you're thinking about a committee, you can also think about organizations that you're already a part of. So I think about like the NAACP. Well, they started a housing committee. Well, who'd they ask to be on that, right? Like, they asked people that they know are doing housing. Portland Metro Chamber, I'm on that board. There's a small business that then there's housing. You know, you can think about a lot of the organizations that you're already a part of that care about housing. And the reason why that's so important is because when we talk about this single stair thing, like, I really think there's something there, right? And it didn't pass because there was a group that decided, you know, structural engineers, that decided it shouldn't pass. Now, Ethan will tell you, in order to get anything passed, you have to have a big coalition, right? How many of you knew that that was even in the makings, right? I didn't know, right? Like, and so the more coalitions we're all a part of, I think about being on the AGC, they have a full-time lobbyist. Like, these are the kind of things, if we come together as a group, and you get Rod, like NAACP, AGC, AIA, Coalition of Communities of Color, you know, Housing Oregon, of course, right? And then we show up in a big way, it's going to be much more difficult for them just to say, no, we're not going to do that, right? I think we have to think about how that participation can be leveraged into real, like, coalition building to leverage this change, because this change has to happen in order to get these projects to pencil at a higher level and a larger scale. And I think we're always looking to like European countries. I visited Switzerland, kind of looking at how they're advancing on cross-laminated timber. And like a lot of that came from Oregon back in early 2000s. And now you're seeing they've just leaped past us as far as their production and efficiency. And every time I walk a building there, like the amount of buildings, and not only the old buildings, like newer buildings that you see these single stair cores. For me, it's just, those are the kind of things that, you know, just numbers in my mind. Immediately, I'm like, well, this building, of course, is cheaper because of this. And I think there's a lot of those ways that we can all work together to push those to the finish line.
And Andrew, I think related to that, or related to kind of the overlap with local on a local level, we had chatted a little bit about OHCS and you know, in past conversations and the way that they're evaluating project costs. And I think you had mentioned you know, the understanding of the jumping costs and the way that it wasn't just the markets, right? That rules and regulations that also changed. And I don't remember what time frame we were talking. I think we were talking about like 5 to 7 years ago.
Yeah, I was talking about in City of Portland, Vision Zero, which is very important, right? It was really implemented to help create more safety around streets and corridors. But one of the elements that came with that on construction projects, every project that we built in the urban core, any of our competitors built in the urban core, remember, like all of a sudden every project had the barriers, and before that they didn't. And somehow we managed to build buildings like the previous 20 years. Well, they created that standard, and instead of telling people, hey, you're gonna have to cross the street for the next 15 months, which of course everybody hates, and you know, people don't like contractors until we're done anyway, so we're kind of used to that in neighborhoods. But I mean, now we're renting full sidewalks, full streets, barriers. Every project that has that, you're adding like $300,000 to those projects. That's a unit, right? So think about what that does when you're talking about 100 projects. That's 100 units of housing that we're spending on renting streets and sidewalks. Like for me, I understand the intention is to create safety, but the end result adds cost to these projects that you all as affordable housing developers cannot pass on to your tenants, right? Market rate, what do they do? They'll pass on that cost of tenants, but that even has an impact on affordable housing because now the AMI of that area, because the rental rates in that area go up. So that means that the people that live in that area have to have more money, which has an impact on the whole ecosystem. So it's some of those moves that we make, not thinking about the ripple effect impacts to the cost of the overall ecosystem of housing. That for me, I always look at it and I'm like, boy, that's really impacting a unit. I think about it as units. When you think about $250,000, $300,000, that's a unit. And whenever I see that kind of cost and I don't get to like touch it, doesn't feel as good to me. You know, it's like buying tires, you know, like you got to buy tires because it's safe, but who's ever excited to buy, like, I just got a new set of tires, they were $1,000. I am so excited, right? It's those kind of expenses that you never are excited about. So it's thinking about those little things at the local level.
And I think when, you know, when these costs, when these changes happen and they are reflected in the costs and the developer has to absorb them, typically what happens on the architectural side is, well, where does the money have to come from, right? Like the money is, you can't get away from the sidewalk rental. The developer's money is fixed. OHCS has already agreed on the funding. We know what the baseline target is. So where does it come out of? It comes out of the building. It comes out of the quality of housing that we're providing. And I think this is one of the reasons as that the AIA recognized last year, we're not involved in those conversations and we're getting it on the back end. And so there are these kind of policy gaps that we're having to negotiate between everybody's independent interests. So I think I'm hoping that the group hears today that the barriers to being involved are not, they're not as solid as maybe people think that they are, that there is a lot of porosity and opportunity there. But I think Eunice made a good point. I think as an architectural community, we don't come together very often. I think Bill is right. Like we often work in silos. It is in part the fact that the design community, we are a business. We, as much as we all love housing, we also compete against each other for for work, right? And I think that that's just the reality of the industry. But the AIA is the one like true organizational body, and that's why we decided to form this committee, so that hopefully as this grows over time, that local jurisdictions will start recognizing that as a potential avenue for a single point of contact and involvement. So that's why for the past year, we have really been working hard to try to get knowledge out there. And you know, one thing that Eunice and I talked about when she invited me to this upcoming focus group was I said, well, how do architects actually get involved in these focus groups? And she had mentioned that often it's actually the developer who brings the architect to the focus group and the table. So I think remember that architects are there to support the development teams as well if you're involved in those conversations. So I think for the remainder of the time that we have left, we did want to leave some time for questions and to talk about how people can get involved or answer questions for people that feel that there are barriers. So any kind of closing thoughts from our panelists today, though?
I would just touch on the OHCS aspect and involvement of architects there. Going back to the same sort of thing I said earlier about, you know, encountering similar challenges on every project. I think architects in the room have probably filed the same variances to OHCS on every project. So, and I'm not saying that there isn't work being done there, but like recognizing what these patterns are and coming up with solutions to better accommodate them. So that, you know, all of that paperwork takes time, and from the development side, from the design side, you know, so things that we can do to streamline is always a goal.
I would say two quick things. I really appreciated Andrew's comment around kind of the vision zero. I think, you know, planners at local jurisdictions, there's transportation planners, right? There's parks planners, there's climate planners, there's natural resource, right? And we all do work together, but sometimes we forget like, oh, you're working on this vision zero. Like, should we be thinking more broadly about who we're involving instead of just bicycle advocates, et cetera. So I think that's a good clue into me to pass along. And I would just mention, I know a lot of you work with OHCS. We in planning work a lot with the Department of Land Conservation and Development, DLCD, and they are doing a ton of housing policy work right now with the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. They're constantly rulemaking. And so if you ever have an opportunity to serve on a rulemaking advisory committee at the state level, they have technical advisory committees. I would recommend that as well. I mean, there's multiple committees going on right now, and they're constantly trying to implement the new laws that are put into place by the legislature. And so I would just look at DLCD as an opportunity as well.
And I just wanted to mention that through a lot of these boards, commissions, volunteer opportunities, lots of times we are the only architect in the room, and we may be the only representative of the entire development community in the room, and we have a real opportunity to broaden people's understanding of development in general, affordable housing specifically. A lot of people just don't understand what the barriers are, and having just even the most basic understanding can really make a difference within these communities.
And I just wanted to say, from the developer's perspective, you know, the architect is the keeper of the built environment. And so I would really encourage the architects in the room to advocate for yourself and for your firms with the development community. You know, when I see a drywall bid for, you know, the cost that it is to pay the architect, my heart just drops. We clearly have our priorities mixed up. So please advocate for good design for your firm, for the health, safety, and welfare of the residents that live in the housing, and be assertive. That's all that's my final word.
The final thing I say is you all start your journey of the idea making. Reach out to the developers and contractors. You all know them. And a lot of times, if you have a big idea, you could talk to a contractor and say, hey, I have this idea. Give me a high level ROM. Is this going to be net positive or net negative, right? And then continue on that journey, then talk to the developer. And then once you've done that, like start pushing that idea forward and then start building the coalition. Cause I think these ideas really can take shape and form. And I think you can get a lot of support behind them.
Well, thank you to all our panelists for this morning's conversation. So we'll open it up for questions and thoughts for either the panelists or Ethan and I. Brian. Oh, here. Okay.
One of the key things next legislative session is we're going to be having a dialogue with legislators to understand why the cost of constructing housing is skyrocketing. Insurance, labor, construction material costs, everything, mortgage rates. So I would love to work with the Housing Alliance as well, figure out how the architects and civil contractors have a lot of knowledge to have those dialogues with legislators. I've been talking with OHCS, and like, y'all are gonna have to talk to the legislators and let them understand why is it costing so much to build affordable houses. So even I'm still not quite sure that the architect or the general contractor better understands the cost of prices of materials and why different components of the building are costing so much. It's kind of a little bit of both. I'm just trying to think through as I work with the Housing Alliance, like who do I need to be getting, make sure that you all getting some legislation with us this next winter. Help explain why the cost went up so much.
So one thing that we did get the AIA board to agree to is they are willing to sponsor 3 architects to sit on the workshop groups at Neighborhood Partnerships. They are, I think, Ethan, you can speak a little bit more to how those workshop groups operate, but the AIA is willing to sponsor 3 architects. We have 1 architect who has volunteered and we have 2 open spots. So the hope there is that they are architects that will be willing to contribute to the conversation. I'm sure that this is one of the topics that will be coming up, and help facilitate that information back to the AIA Housing Committee for a broader industry-wide conversation and make a recommendation. Part of that process will involve us taking to the AIA asking for formal support to support legislation that Housing Oregon, Housing Alliance are supporting. And if there is a direct overlap with the architectural profession, we will also engage our own legislative affairs committee. But Ethan, do you want to comment a little bit about those workshop groups that we are trying to get architectural involvement in?
Yeah, I think a lot of the workshop groups and work groups that I participate and facilitate in, it's primarily a space just for things that need to be said. When I facilitate and when I look for information to influence policy, I want to hear it straight from the source. I can barely build a birdhouse, let alone tell you why things cost what they cost, in the architecture and development world. So having very specific experts in their field participating in these broader work groups that will eventually influence policy is the place to start. Getting in there and speaking honestly and clearly is a really great way to do it, specifically within the Housing Alliance. It's getting perspectives all on one Zoom call or around the same table and asking the question and listening to the answers and figuring it out. I make it sound so simple, but sometimes it is.
So if you are an architect and would like to take one of those spots, feel free to contact me after. We would welcome that. Any other questions? Haley?
Trying to make more questions now. First, I was very appreciative of the last final statements about Oregon housing and community service as part of your advocacy. I feel like as an architect, we need to advocate more with Oregon Housing Community Services for exactly the reasons that you mentioned. We're all taking the same exemption. But in addition, just having now done a lot of work in the state of Washington compared to the state of Oregon, I realized how fortunate we are to actually have Oregon Housing and Community Services. and that as architects, we're probably not working with Oregon Housing Community Services enough to give them this feedback loop. I wish in this design process on another affordable housing development in Washington that there was someone, some entity like Oregon Housing Community Services to advocate and ensure that there is a standardization, if you will, or advocating that affordable housing gets as many things as market rate does, right? And then I think Oregon Housing Community Services does that well. What I think, or I'm getting to my question is like, I think that there's opportunity to advocate to have affordable housing capture some of those things that we all feel like we need, and Oregon Housing Services could be a great organization to ensure that. The way that like the energy code now does. We're mandated with the energy code in the state of Oregon and Washington to have certain things like ERVs and solar, and which is great. Like it'd be great to also have other things mandated on us that we all know improve or better to capture an affordable housing. So I was just sort of, I guess I'm not getting into a question, but more of a statement is I think Oregon Housing and Community Services is a great place for us as architects to potentially advocate more with, because I think that is a great organization that then ensure that those things are captured in affordable housing.
I think there is a question in there, and I will respond, and I think I want a little bit of Wendy's help as well. So for those of you that don't know, OHCS only has one architect on staff. Yesterday they did a presentation at 9 a.m. and I went to that presentation. It was with the intention of cornering Kaylin, who deals with their asset management. We had a great conversation after their morning session, and one of the things that I brought to her was a point that Haley is making, that it's not just at a state level that policy can be made in the quality of housing that we are designing and developing. I actually gave her an example that we have a development that has some unregulated units, and because of that, the development team was like, well, we need to upgrade the finishes of those units to be on par with the market rate units because they're unregulated. In reality, now that that development is opening, in hindsight, we are having the conversation of like, really what should have been upgraded were the 30% AMI units, because they've only been open for 4 months and they are taking a heavy beating. And these are the types of things that at a state legislation level, the state isn't going to regulate, like provide solid surface counters, like provide durable, higher durability at a different AMI, but that is something that on an OHCS level that can be made. So Kayla and I talked about, well, how can this feedback loop exist? And it was interesting because she said that Kevin was not attending the conference yesterday because he's like, well, what am I going to do there? And it's interesting because he's our architect at OHCS. So I think she has offered to kind of open that gateway. And I'm just kind of, Wendy could, as a developer, I think engage with OHCS more than any of us do. And could you just maybe speak a little bit to those potential opportunities?
Absolutely. I've talked to Kevin for many years now, and I will say that we are supposed to upload all our drawings and specs to the Procorum. I find it very hard to believe that they're looking at those. So I would caution in creating more regulations from OHCS. I'm working in a different state, and their housing finance agency has, doesn't care what you put in the units. They don't have I forget what is the Kevin's book called?
The
CDM. They don't have that thing. What they do require is a market study, which I actually think is sort of more relevant. Oregon does not require a market study when you apply for financing. So you almost have no idea if your units, if the market can support the units that you're building. So I'm not saying that we should require that. I hesitate to create more rules and regulations from a group that isn't even really reviewing them. And so I think if we were looking at market forces, solid surface counters or laundry in units, it should really be market driven. And so we have this funny industry, which is pseudo private, pseudo public. And a lot of the times, you know, you see a lot of housing built like in Lents or East Portland, you know, because there's big plots of land where you can build those big rectangle buildings with, you know, the double loaded corridors and the stairs. So I think we need to think of the market first and maybe keep OHCS out of prescriptive rules for our housing. That's just my opinion. I don't know if anybody.
And that's interesting though, because the dialogue doesn't exist. So, oh. No, that's fantastic to hear because, you know, we also have gripes because I think the point made earlier is we all file for the same variances over and over and over again. And then there are other variances that you're like, why is this even here? Or what other regulations? So I think we're at time. So thank you everybody for participating. I think